Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. According to United States Trade Representative data, New Mexico exported $3.7 billion in goods in 2018. That's a 31% increase since 2008. Here to discuss trade in New Mexico and how the COVID-19 pandemic may be impacting trade is Jerry Pacheco, president of the Border Industrial Association. Mr. Pacheco also serves as the executive director of the International Business Accelerator, and he writes a syndicated column, Business Across Borders, for the Albuquerque Journal. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anthony. Good to be here.
I'd like to start off with the pandemic and hear how the pandemic has really impacted business in Santa Teresa, where you work.
It's a strange dichotomy, and I'll tell you why. A lot of our business is tied into the transportation industry here. In other words, we have automotive component suppliers that sell their products to Mexico. We've only had two firms completely furlough 100% of the workforce during the crisis, and both of them were very tied into the automotive industry. And other firms have actually laid off workers. They're starting to bring them back online. We don't have any firm down right now. But the weird dichotomy is, would you believe it, our worldwide exports out of New Mexico, which are dominated by Mexico, are up 3% compared to 2019 through the same period of time, through April. Our exports to Mexico are up 31% versus last year. Our China exports have taken a hit. They're down 35%. But it's interesting. I would have thought that the pandemic would have severely slashed our exports, and we would have had a loss by now, but that's not the case.
Well, so what about businesses? What businesses are really seeing a change in the way they're operating? I mean, has there been a great demand for some businesses?
There is. For example, in our Santa Teresa Airport Park, we have a company called Sterigenics. They sterilize medical instruments, products, and foodstuffs. So their business has been going gangbusters. But I like to say that I always advocate that we recruit businesses to the border. The businesses we tend to get, I call meat and potatoes. They're not very sexy. They're not high-tech pharmaceutical or what have you. They're metal producers, they're plastic injection producers, they're packaging, they're wire. So during a pandemic like this, it makes sense. Those kind of products are needed to keep the economy going. They're going into ventilators, they're going into, they're packaging foods, they're creating automotive parts. So we have a pretty good meat and potatoes industrial base down here.
Is there any specific industry that you think is really going to see growth now that so many people are concerned about perhaps how sterilized certain equipment is and things like that?
Well, I mean, if you look at it in general sense, the packaging industry, because as we get the economy rolling again, we're all buying products. We're buying things in boxes. We're buying food. We have a couple of corrugators here, which make the cardboard that go into packaging. We have a printer that is a corrugator also. We have a lithography company that does a lot of printing for everybody from Sony to Toyota. But our industry is steady because, again, you need the steel that goes into medical products. You need the wire that goes into high-tech electronic components. We have for example, CommScope. We have a company that does telecommunications equipment. And now that we're isolating, you and I are on a Zoom interview here, I'm sure that somehow their technology is involved in allowing you and I to communicate.
Yeah, you mentioned Zoom. It's kind of changed the way we've done business. We now are used to looking into the cameras right in front of us and like talking to our coworkers, the people we're doing business. How is that impacting the business that you're doing in trying to grow industry along the border?
It's interesting. I guess I'm begrudgingly accustomed now to Zoom, but what I do miss a lot is that one-on-one personal interaction. When we have to be creative at the border because we're so far away from Santa Fe. Not that they don't support us, but we really have to take care of ourselves. And I miss because my team right now is they're all working from home. And I miss the interaction of walking down the office and talking to one of my team members and saying, "What do you think about that?" Or they come to my office and tell me, "You're out of your mind. We can't do that, or we need to do it this way." We jump on conference calls a couple of times a week, but it's not the same. I mean, that human interaction, I really miss it for creativity.
I mean, it's got to play a role in recruiting businesses to New Mexico as well. I mean, they want to see, come and visit and see what they're dealing with or possibly going to be investing in. Do you think that there's going to be a slowdown, or are there any big challenges with that, or how are you guys adapting?
No, let me answer that in two ways here. We just announced, and I think I sent you a copy of that. Maybe it's in your email. We just landed a company out of Dallas, Texas, a company called Blue Road. It's a speculative builder. They're building a 315,000 square foot facility for lease, and they just broke ground last week. And so I go out every day to watch the moving equipment move the earth. Um, that's 315,000 square feet. Right
Wow.
now, we're actually seeing the completion of Franklin Mountain Industrial's new spec building that's 183,000 square feet. So that'll be done within 20 days. That means we're going to have 500,000 square feet of new space in Santa Teresa. That's in addition to Admiral Cable, which is our first Taiwanese company that is finishing its two-building campus over here. We also built, during the crisis, we built a 5-mile gas line. It's our second natural gas line into Mexico that's going into San Jeronimo to supply the businesses on the other side of the border. And we get a bump from that in our exports, our New Mexican exports, so forth and so on. But I expect, if you believe the pundits and the economists, and I'm an armchair economist, I see a lot of reshoring or the coming back from Asia of a lot of businesses to mitigate the risk. Or if not coming fully, they're going to build satellite operations. And I've already been dealing with companies from Asia that indicate that that's what they're doing.
Now, you mentioned Asia. I'd like to talk with you a little bit about China. And obviously, President Trump has had some harsh words for China over the years, and we've had a trade war with them that's been happening. So I'd like to hear kind of your thoughts on how you think trade with China is going right now and how it's impacting the border region here in southern New Mexico.
Well, I mean, from our personal standpoint, our trade with China is down 35%. Our exports are down. We have a considerable, strong agricultural sector that exports to China, and that's been hurt because of tariffs that have been imposed during this trade war. I think China is always or has been an issue for the last 20 years in terms of how they operate and how we deal with them. But I don't see that the escalation of tariffs to the point where I think it's only a third of what we trade with China is non-tariffed at this point has helped either nation, especially during this pandemic. But I do see a lot of firms hedging their bets to control their supply chains, which have been severely disrupted during this crisis, setting up a satellite office or moving operations wholesale back to North America. And we are in a prime position in New Mexico's border region to capture some of that.
What are the top countries that New Mexico is exporting goods to?
Well, number one is Mexico. About 52% of what we trade in total is going to Mexico. China is right behind that. You've got countries like Japan and Germany, the bigger European countries, the UK, but none are as big as our trade with Mexico, which is logical. I mean, we're a border state. Our biggest advantage that we have in attracting industry, and I love the incentives, I love the support from the public sector, but our biggest advantage is that, border that we share with our neighbor to the south. We have a heck of an opportunity to capitalize on that and create investment and jobs. And that's what we've been doing for the better part of 30 years down here.
There's been a lot of concern about how Mexico is dealing with the pandemic and how it's put a strain on their healthcare system. How has it impacted business along the border and the companies that the companies you work with are interacting with?
It's been a major disruptive force. You had maquilas furlough their workers. When the big three automakers shut down for that period of time a couple of months ago, it shut down the supply chain, of which Mexico is part of that. They're assembling components, but they're assembling components that we in New Mexico make or supply. So it's been very disruptive. And let me give you an example of how difficult reopening the economy is. Number one, even though certain industries were allowed to go back to work, a lot of their employees had cut a deal with the maquiladoras, the Mexican manufacturing plants, to stay at home and get a paycheck through the 1st of June. Second of all, you have to have social distancing. It's mandated by the Mexican government. So a lot of employees that work in these production plants are bused to their jobs. So now you cannot load 40 people on a bus. You have to have about half of that. So now what happens? Do you run double the amount of buses? Do you work different shifts? And companies are doing that. You see companies that work running a third shift to try to spread out their employees. It's been extremely difficult.
Now, obviously, there are some major challenges. What are you hearing from the companies there? Are they going to be able to sustain this type of operation and able to ensure that they get their workers to the factories?
I don't think we have a choice. I've become my role. I would never have thought in 2020, in probably about the 30th year of my career, that my role has been chiefly an acquirer of personal protection equipment for our industrial base. I mean, we're finding hand sanitizer here, we're finding it there, we're buying it in bulk. Masks, the same thing. We're lucky we have one of our Santa Teresa companies, Acme Mills, one of their plants ended up buying a whole container of masks before this whole outbreak started. So we've been able to access those masks. But we don't have a choice. I mean, that's our role going forward until we find a vaccine for this thing. We're going to have to adjust. And if you ever go to business school and get your MBA, the most important thing that you'll ever learn is that to survive, you've got to adapt in the business world. And this is the supreme test of that.
So give us an understanding of what it's like all of a sudden becoming a dealer of personal protection equipment for these businesses.
I'm very anti-drug, but I feel like what a drug pusher would feel like. I'm literally meeting people in parking lots and pulling stuff out of my trunk. How you need some hand sanitizer? I got some right here. That kind of stuff, or masks. But that's our role. I mean, I deliver the stuff as far as Las Cruces because we have members in our Border Industrial Association, and actually it's been as far as Albuquerque. Our Border Industrial Association has shipped, I think, about 9,000 masks to a nonprofit that's aiding the Navajo Nation and cases of hand sanitizer. It's just been, I would never have imagined that that's what my role would be. And I'm sitting in a room here, Anthony, where I'm staring at cases of hand sanitizer and boxes of masks. And that's my world right now.
Wow. Now you mentioned shipping. It's such an important role there. In along the border with the companies that you work with. I believe the first time I visited that area was for the unveiling of the new Union Pacific Intermodal Center, the rail center there. I'd like to kind of hear an update on really how rail has done so far in Santa Teresa. What's new there?
I mean, the rail is a catalyst. We had a lot of interest, a lot of growth and development, but it's just like putting gravy on your mashed potatoes. The railroad has been just an anchor tenant. We use that to sell this region. Why is Santa Teresa a great region? Why did Union Pacific pick us to establish one of the biggest intermodal yards that they have in their entire national system? The rail is important right now in the movement of goods. I know their business is a little off, as probably most businesses off, but it's an essential business to move all the medical equipment, foods, all of the stuff that we use in our daily life. The Union Pacific project has been a godsend to Santa Teresa and to New Mexico.
So, could you kind of tell us what are some of your concerns right now? Obviously, the economic downturn has impacted everybody in the United States, across the globe. In New Mexico, they are having real concerns in Santa Fe dealing with the budget. What are your concerns with the pandemic and the way it's hit the economy and how it may impact business along the border?
Well, there's two things here that I'm very concerned about. One, one is our motto of you've got to keep infrastructure ahead of development. And as we're growing, we're bursting at the seams. We're going to need expanded water, wastewater. We're going to need good roads. We're going to need all that, all the utilities. And that comes often in the form of capital outlay to us down here. And right now, the state is just trying to plug holes in its budget, and I appreciate that. We actually have some money that was allocated to us for a border highway that would run parallel to the border into Sunland Park and eventually hook up with the border highway in El Paso. And that's in danger of being reverted to plug holes. That's a concern for us because you've got to keep the infrastructure going. The other thing is, I hope that the powers that be in Santa Fe appreciate how much our economic development groups throughout New Mexico matter right now. We got to get people back to work. We got to help companies preserve their lives right now. I'm talking about our International Business Accelerator is part of the Small Business Development Centers network. It's the biggest economic development group in almost every major city in New Mexico, helping small businesses. I really hope that our legislators preserve that and the New Mexico Partnership, which was created back in 2003 to promote New Mexico and recruit companies here. We're needed more than ever right now to go and recruit businesses, to get in front of that wave of potential clients coming from Asia and reshoring. Our economic development groups right now are in more important to us than ever, and I hope that our friends up in Santa Fe respect that and don't nick us too bad in any budget cuts.
This pandemic has really shined light on how important it is to have infrastructure regarding high-speed internet. How is that playing a role with the business that you're doing along the border?
The pandemic, let me answer that from a community-based standpoint. Most of our businesses down here are larger businesses. A lot are Fortune 500, so they have a lot of resources. But can you imagine? Some places here on the border, 50% of the households do not have internet connection. So we've been struggling here. We have a Santa Teresa charitable foundation, and we've been trying to help families that are underserved or underprivileged down here. One of the things that's going on is mobile hotspots down here, so the kids can get their homework done. I mean, to you and me, it's probably a given. I'm going to go home, I can surf the internet, and I can order from Walmart, have it delivered at my house, or I can study there. A lot of the children we have here and a lot of their parents do not have that access. And this pandemic is really highlighting a lot of our weaknesses in that sense between the haves and the have-nots.
Now, obviously, the state legislative group analyzed exactly how that's impacting learning and said it's drastically impacted the learning that young people are having in New Mexico right now. When you think broad terms and see how that may impact the education in the state, how does that impact the business that you're doing?
Well, because those young people, those kids, end up being our workforce, and we need to we need to identify people that have good work skills, that are knowledgeable, that don't have to come in just completely green and need a whole lot of training, and that bring up the community. I mean, we have poor communities along the border. And you want those now young adults, as they grow up to be young adults, to have skills to be able to contribute to the community. It aids in the prevention of crime, in the prevention of people having to go on welfare, what have you. But from a selfish standpoint, in our industrial base, you want knowledgeable people. Our firms are always challenged with finding good workers that have skills, that can read and write, that have basic arithmetic skills. I had one plant manager tell me a while back that he stopped giving a basic arithmetic test to prospects because so many were failing, it was almost useless. And their algorithm said if you can't get X percentage on your arithmetic test, then you can't get hired. So he kicked out a huge portion of his workforce. That's going to be highlighted now during the pandemic. People that are not being subjected to a very good education, or having the I would say it's a disability almost of not having internet at your house.
Now, you mentioned how important the relationship is in trade with Mexico, and you mentioned concern about exporting to China and how those have dropped some. What are your concerns with the industries that are really doing well right now? How can they be able to sustain that type of success moving forward?
It goes back to my meat and potatoes analogy. Most of our businesses, even during bad economic times, are producing because you and I still have to eat. You're still going to have to buy an iPhone once your iPhone, dies. We're still going to have to get in our cars and drive somewhere, or have the delivery driver come deliver stuff. So I really, I'm impressed. I guess I didn't realize how essential our industrial base is down here. Even on the automotive side, out of the several automotive companies we have, only two furloughed completely their employees. And that tells you they're essential businesses. This is the type of economic model, and I don't want to sound like I'm self-aggrandizing here, but this is the type of economic model and the type of businesses that New Mexico should go after. I know we have to go after pharmaceuticals, nanotechnology, all this stuff. You've got to have your fishing line in the lake trying to catch on at the end of your line there. But the more meat and potatoes essential businesses, it helps us weather the economic storms. And all you have to do is ask the people that didn't lose their jobs, that still had to come into work every day during this pandemic.
Now, there's obviously been the automotive industry is pretty crucial to what you're doing down there and the businesses that are operating down there. Electronics as well. What are going to be the things that are really gathering attention from our part of the region? What products are going to be doing really well 10 years from now?
Oh my God, you're making me a soothsayer here, Look, until we find a way to put wings on our shoulders and fly, the automotive industry is going to be here with us. The nature might change to more electrical, more green type technology in cars, but we have companies that are still going to make your foam for your seats. They're still going to make the wire that goes into your wire harnesses and the electronics. The automotive industry is going to be here. The food industry also, but the ancillary industries that are related to that. You and I are still going to have packaging. I don't see how that does not occur in the next 10 to 25 years. We're going to get a product, it's going to come in a box, it's going to have a label printed on it. That stuff is here in Santa Teresa. We also have logistics industries down here. You got to move the product, you got to move it to the end user. But not only do you have to move the product to the end user, you also have to supply the firms that are making the product. So everything from plastic injection to components, metal components, stamped components. We have a company that does stamping components down here. As long as you can have a lawnmower, Stanco is going to stamp your Toro body for your lawnmower down here. So I'm very impressed because I always used to call it meat and potatoes. But until this pandemic came, we never had a test like this to see if we're really essential. And it is. And I want to go forward in my job and recruit these type of companies that are going to bring a lot of investment, put a lot of people to work, and contribute to the community.
I just have about a minute left with you, but I want to ask about an issue that was a challenge for some businesses, and that was transportation for some employees. Is that still a challenge in getting people to work in the southern part of Doña Ana County?
It is, but it's always been a challenge for us because we have employees in the industrial base that come from Chaparral, some come from Las Cruces, a lot of them carpool, and now it's kind of a dicey thing to put so many people in a car and bring them down here. It's always been a challenge because we're not, you can imagine, we're 45, 50 miles away from Las Cruces, which is our big city in New Mexico. Granted, we're part of the El Paso metro area here, but transportation safely, bringing workers to their jobs and safely allowing them to do their jobs is extremely difficult, because if you've been in some of these fabricating plants, these factories, they work in teams and they work right on top of each other. And you've got these groups, and now you've got to try to social distance, and it's extremely, extremely difficult. That's a challenge until we get a vaccine that we're going to have to deal with, and everybody's dealing with that down here.
Jerry Pacheco is president of the Border Industrial Association. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anthony.
And we want to thank you for watching Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.